So, I mean, it's that first part really that we're looking at is to do with temptation, isn't it? Particularly from verses 12 to around about 16. And I just wondered, we'd actually, as a church, spoken lately on the subject of temptation, and the question had come up: is it wrong to be tempted? Is it wrong to be tempted? Just wondered whether for the Bible study, you know, whether that could that question could be considered for a moment. Is it wrong to be tempted? What do you think? I'll tell you why, because if you look at verse verse 14 and 15, it kind of, if you read it at first glance, it kind of seems to say that temptation might be the sin. But is it?
No.
No. No. Okay. Yeah. No. No is the answer. Yeah. What would you say is the difference between temptation and sin?
Well, I think you look at it with the example of the Lord Jesus.
Yeah.
He was led into the wilderness, and there the devil tempted him. He put before him certain things and asked him to make a decision about them. For example, showing him the kingdoms of the world and saying, you can have all this if you bow down before me.
Yes.
And of course we know there were other temptations that he put before him.
Yes.
But Jesus resisted. So we know that Jesus had to be pure and sinless to be a sacrifice for sin. Otherwise he's not. He's the wrong sacrifice. It has to be a spotless lamb that was used for sacrifice for sin. Therefore Jesus was sinless. I think we can agree on that.
Yes.
Therefore his temptation couldn't be counted as sin.
Excellent.
Otherwise it disqualified him for being a sin sacrifice for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. Any other comments? Did you look like you wanted to?
I was just going to say that it says drawn away with his own lust.
Yes.
So I was just thinking about that then and thinking that it must mean the lust of the flesh, which we want to put to death. So I guess maybe you would be less susceptible to temptation the more that you put to death the flesh.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Because it comes from the flesh, doesn't it? That's where the Bible talks about the difference between being a fleshly man and a spiritual man.
What would we say the definition of tempted was? Is it like what is it like? What does it mean?
Well,
I mean that's
verse 14. It says when he is drawn away with his own lust and enticed. So I think if your flesh is open to being enticed, it likes, your flesh likes certain things, doesn't it? And it doesn't like certain things. So if your flesh sees an opportunity, it can get enticed away into, and that's temptation. But it's only if you give into it and actually, commit.
Yeah, temptation is being offered an opportunity to sin, isn't it?
Yes.
It's presenting you with something that you know is sin and saying, would you like this? Or saying to yourself, would I like this? And then you have a choice to make, don't you?
Yeah, but temptation is something that arises from within, isn't it? It's not, you may be tempted by something external, but it's something that rises from within. Whereas trials, which we were talking about last week, are something that come upon you, and you have very often no influence over that at all.
That's excellent, because that's why if you look at verse 13, it says, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. And actually Wesley says, let no man who is tempted say he's been tempted to sin. That is, in the sense of seducement. So I think verse 13 is, verse 12 and 13 is probably carrying on from what you were doing last week. Then the emphasis shifts towards temptation to sin. But there is an interesting point at which temptation does turn into sin. Look back at verse 15. Has somebody got the King James Version? Because verse 15, if they read that, that kind of gives the order of or the sequence of events.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, please.
Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death.
Okay. Can anybody outline what's going on in that verse? There seems to be three aspects to this. Three parts that James delineates in that verse. First,
well, I was going to
sorry,
say conception, birth, and
yeah,
death.
excellent.
And almost like cycle of life, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's exactly right. Conception, birth, and then death, or when it's become full grown. So that's kind of as you grow to adulthood, as you go to maturity, it comes to the point where it leads inevitably to death. So let's go back to that first one, because this is where temptation doesn't actually have to be an action always. You have to follow it up with an action. But the temptation somehow grows. It comes to a tipping point, really, where it turns into a matter of sin. Can you think of anything Jesus said that proves that? That was very vague, isn't it? I'll give you a clue then regarding adultery.
Are you thinking of in Matthew 5, where it says if you look with lust upon a woman,
yes,
you're an adulterer at heart, basically.
Yeah,
You've committed adultery in your heart.
that's right. So there is that. Would you agree then? There's a kind of a fine line, isn't there, between what could initially be a temptation, which you rebuke, you repudiate, and then perhaps just going a little step further in thought, it conceives, conception takes place, and that desire gives birth to sin.